Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, fresh off the plane, Rob Morse, Self Defense Gun Stories. Of course, he's also one of my co hosts on the Polite Society podcast, which happens on Monday evenings. Rob, thanks for coming along today, man.
It's been my pleasure, Paul.
So, what I want to talk about a little bit before we get into the news of the day, you took a trip yesterday, but you didn't go underwater. You did something that is every bit as cool. You went down to Arizona to be a part of their initial faster class. Can you
Yes.
and you've been through the faster class before the Ohio version. Could you tell us a little bit about your trip and are there any differences between Arizona and Ohio in their faster programs?
Uh, yes. Faster is a program that trains volunteer school staff so they can be first responders if their facility is attacked. The volunteer stops an attack and then learns how to stop the bleeding. Not trying to become a cop or a doctor. They're trying to keep people alive until the police and EMTs finally get there. Faster trains school security and church security as well. Um, as a particular bonus to me, I've taken this class several times in Ohio and a similar class in Colorado. Each is tailored for their state to survive the political requirements of each state. Usually the shooting qualifications are based off the police officer standards shooting test. Well, some states that's harder than others. What's interesting is no matter how many rounds are fired, and that may vary from state to state or the distances or the size of the target, but how many misses are allowed varies. In Ohio, I could qualify that probably with either hand. Colorado, I had to pay attention. In Arizona, I failed to qualify as a police officer firearms instructor because of one miss. So I could qualify as a law enforcement officer. So they're sorting out to figure out what do we want from the people who will be in our schools, in our churches. Now, all this qualification does to the people who were in the class, it lets them say, okay, Mr. Principal and Superintendent, you asked me to take this class. I passed it. Now let's talk about what you want me to do. It is not a license to carry in school. They've already been vetted by their local management. They've already volunteered, obviously. But now that they've passed it, okay, how do we set up a schedule? They're both the organization in Arizona and these schools are setting these up for the first time. In Ohio, there are I think there are 300 districts that already
Mm-hmm.
have this set up. So if you go to a conference about educators, there'll be the people in the corner who know all about Faster talking about it, and they're not the Faster group. They are the schools themselves, their own security officers, their own teachers. So Arizona is catching up. I think there are now 20 states that have either have the program or have sent teachers so they could take Faster training.
I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you noticed you've taken it in Ohio, you've taken it in Colorado, now you've taken it in Arizona? Uh, there's subtle differences in the program itself. Have you noticed any differences in people taking the training from state to state?
No. Well, I've noticed subtle differences between the classes in the same state that are the same size as the differences in the classes from state to state. You know, some of the teachers are in private schools, some are in public. This was the first time I'd had a school resource officer who was for one of the tribal reservations there. So different rules apply. It's interesting to hear the police officers say, "What do you in your do in your district about this? What do we do in ours?" So everything is different from state to state, but the fundamentals stay the same.
Very cool. Very cool. Anything surprise you about this past weekend?
Um, yes, there was a young teacher. We were doing, there's 2 days of, there's a day of training, a day of qualification, a then the third day is force on force training in a realistic scenario. Um, they chose this particular school. It had a religious component, so there was a sanctuary. There were also classrooms. So that was very useful for people who were church security and going through the program. They were able to set up realistic scenarios for both groups. When they said there's a bad guy in your classroom, the classroom they chose was this teacher's classroom.
Oh,
She hightailed it there. This is as realistic as a simulation can get. Um, I think I don't mean to exaggerate it. She might weigh 110 pounds soaking wet, and she was named Wheels after that, or I dubbed her that, because she was not going to be stopped. She just kept going.
now one of the things I know about Faster, you have an advantage of me. You've been to the Faster program.
Right
I had an opportunity, but it was too soon after my stroke, and I had
after the
not
stroke, right?
healed enough to be taking part in something that strenuous yet. But what Faster generally says is the individual teachers are defending their classroom. They are not necessarily the police for the facility. If a shooting happens, their first primary responsibility is taking care of the kids that are there in front of them. That's their charge. So having a scenario where the teacher has to run to to the problem that kind of surprised me a little bit.
Well, teachers have off periods where they'll do prep. Okay, if you they had walkie talkies on this facility, if you hear there's an armed intruder outside of a certain classroom, and you were one of the armed defenders, would you stop? Not my classroom, not my problem.
No,
No,
you're
you're going to
absolutely
go.
right.
Yeah. Um, and as you find interesting, I'm sure there were scenarios where the solution was not to use a firearm,
Where the solution was what?
to not use a firearm. The
Okay.
gun was not the solution to every problem, which was good to remind people. Yeah.
Well, and that's something everybody, myself included, needs to be reminded of. The old saying goes, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Exactly what they were trying to address in some of the scenarios.
All right, let's go ahead and move on a little bit. Let's get to the stories of the day. And I do want to remind everybody as we get started with the news stories, you can comment on either the Facebook or YouTube live videos if you're watching on the Polite Society podcast stream. We'll get those. We'll get comments. We'll get them up. We'll discuss them live. We don't have any comments yet, which is unusual. Usually people are checking in, so I'm a little bit of a loss there. But if we get some, we'll get them put up. Let's go ahead and start our first one off. And Michigan, we got two bad news stories. Michigan leads the pack. You want to take the first one, Rob?
Sure. A Michigan Democrat governor signed a red flag law, and there are huge questions about how it can be enforced. The law claims to keep firearms away from those who are at risk of harming themselves or others. New Mexico was the last state to pass a red flag law. That was back in 2020. The law goes into effect next spring, and it will allow, this is important, you pay attention to this list, family members, police, mental health professionals, roommates, and former dating partners to ask a judge to remove firearms from someone without that person being charged with a crime or even being present. Some local sheriffs in Michigan said they can't enforce that law because it's already been ruled unconstitutional in so many different federal districts. Over half of the state's counties in Michigan have passed resolutions declaring themselves as Second Amendment sanctuaries, where they said, look, if it's a questionable law, until you show that it passes constitutional muster, we're not going to enforce it. Now, here's an interesting quote from the state's attorney general. For those who are in law enforcement who refuse to enforce these important orders, notice he didn't say laws. Let me say this loudly and clearly. I will make certain that I find someone with jurisdiction who will enforce these orders. It's a judge's order. Paul, what do you think?
I I made sure that quote made it into show notes for one reason, and that is quite often we hear if things get really bad, law enforcement will be on our side. Not so much. Law enforcement is a lot like the general public. There are law enforcement who believe in our constitutional rights and work hard to expand our rights. There are law enforcement who are neutral, and there are law enforcement who really don't believe you should be able to have a gun. They will be able to find people that will enforce these orders no matter where it is. Do you know somebody who is an okay person, but they have some really strange ideas about what the government should make people or companies do? Yeah, they're going to find those in law enforcement. They will enforce these things. I have no doubt of that.
A lot of patrol officers will do what their sergeant tells them to do because they go, was I willing to lose my job and my pension over this? That's a tough call. A lot of them will say, you know what? I don't like this law, but you'll have to sort it out in court.
Yeah. This will go to court. I will absolutely agree that the constitutionally this
how many
is
minutes old is this?
Yeah, this is today.
It's probably, I'm betting that by the bullet tomorrow there's a lawsuit on.
It would not shock me in the least. Our next story is right next door to me in Minnesota. Minnesota governor signs safety measures, red flag law, and expanded background checks. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz signed 2 gun safety measures into law Friday afternoon. This past Friday, aligning his battleground state with others nationally that have taken steps to keep guns out of the people in crisis and criminals. The big one here is Gabby Gifford stopped by to help out there. She lent her face and her voice to the proceedings when he signed the law. Her quote from her is, "Stopping gun violence takes courage," Gifford says. "Now is the time to come together, be responsible, Democrat, Republican, Independent. We must never stop the fight." Supporters said the policies are the beginning, not the end, of an effort to protect people across the state and prevent mass shootings at schools, grocery stores, yada, yada, yada. And I want it, this is another one. Supporters said the policies are the beginning, not the end, of an effort. And their ultimate goal, Rob, this should come as no shock to anybody who watches or listens to this show. Their ultimate goal is total disarmament.
Of course it is. Never let a, what is it?
Never let a crisis
go to waste. Never let a crisis go to waste because it lets you do things you couldn't otherwise do.
Right.
I'm going to look at the record of gun control. California has had these gun confiscation laws for decades. They lead the nation in mass murders and the criminal use of a firearm. Gun prohibitionists, despite the fact that gun control fails millions of times a year, claim that the 23,000 firearms regulations that are already on the books, well, of course they fail, because that's only a good first step. If after 23,000 firearms regulations you haven't got it covered, I think you're lost. We have to remind our listeners that we use firearms in armed self-defense to save lives about 3 million times.
Yeah. It's and then I'm going to put a plug in here for Rob's blog. Rob's done the math, and he's often comes up with, E equals MC squared type equations where it sounds good, but I couldn't figure it out in my head to save my life. Rob's an engineer by trade. He does math backwards, forwards, and sideways faster than I can. But any gun restriction will cost lives. Is basically what I've gotten out of this.
Yeah, and for reporters that don't care, and Giffords who'd willingly lie to advance her gun disarmament agenda, what pains me is the reporters don't care that those legislative efforts are costing lives.
Yeah.
Ought to be embarrassing. On to the good news?
Yes,
Do
please.
we have any comments yet?
Not yet, and I've even looked over onto Restream, and I don't see comments. I know people are watching, I can see that, but I don't have any comments in here. So please, everybody, put comments in. We'd love to talk about what you think.
Yeah, let us make sure that system is working. The Firearms Policy Coalition won an injunction against the ATF's pistol brace ban for the plaintiffs.
Say that 5 times fast.
I thought I could talk this morning. The decision was handed down by a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a 3-judge panel this time. They won the lower court, and then it was handed up. The Fifth Circuit includes parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. I'm not sure who else.
That's it.
There were 2 Donald Trump appointees and 1 Judge George W. Bush appointee on the panel. It is waiting to hear arguments in Mock v. Garland, where the plaintiffs are taking on the ATF's new brace, and that would reclassify millions of pistol braces as short-barreled rifles, and then restricted by the National Firearms Act of 1934. This change would mean that millions of Americans who the ATF said were fine to buy this would become felons on June 1 unless they re-registered their braces as SBRs. The judge's injunction, judges plural, will protect the status quo until the appeals court has heard the entire case. For millions of us who have those items, that's a sigh of relief.
Well, and I want to point out that I draw off 2 stories. One is a John Crump story. The other one a Cam Edwards story for information about this particular ban. I also listened to Mark Smith's Four Boxes Diner
Yeah.
YouTube earlier today. But the thing I want to bring up about this one is this only applies in the Fifth Circuit, and the way it was issued. It's unclear exactly who is protected by this injunction. It could be just the people on the paperwork. It could be just Firearms Policy Coalition members. It could be something other than that. It could be just the public of the Fifth Circuit. But it does only apply to the people who filed. So whether the people who filed include all Firearms Policy Coalition members or not, I'm not sure.
To me, what's fascinating about that, Paul, if I bought it from a company who sold it in the Fifth Circuit, am I covered? Can I have these firearm components outside the Fifth Circuit if I'm a resident of it? So this is the beginning of the answer, not the end.
Well, and we are coming up. That is supposed to that you are a felon if on June 1st, so in a week and a half, you're going to be a felon if you have a AR pistol with a pistol brace. So
crazy.
The court cases are moving quickly, but I wish they would move even more quickly.
Amen to you.
Let's go ahead and talk about Louisiana. Rob, your adopted home state of Louisiana. The House votes to expand gun rights, allow concealed carry without permits or training. This is off of ShreveportTimes.com. Louisiana is on the cusp of expanding gun rights after the House overwhelmingly passed a bill Tuesday that would allow adults, and that's to Tuesday today, that would allow adults 18 and older to carry handguns without permits or training, as is currently required. Republican Oil City State Rep Danny McCormick's House Bill 131 would restore the Second Amendment in Louisiana. For too long, Louisiana has been infringing on that God-given right, said McCormick, who said his 6-year-old granddaughter is quite proficient with an AR-15 assault rifle. I doubt he said that, but
I doubt he said that too.
Maybe he said AR-15, but the last bit wasn't there, I'm sure. Nothing is more unjust than to insist citizens pay for a right they already have, he said. Rob, this did pass the Louisiana legislature 2 years ago.
Right.
And John Bell Edwards vetoed it, and they didn't have the votes to override the veto. Same governor, same legislature. Do you think they've got the votes to override the veto?
We're going to find out. In theory, they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't go through this exercise. Louisiana is notorious for political paybacks. The senator who was promised a seat on the Louisiana Gambling Commission, I think, or is it Gaming Commission, then had to be approved in the Senate. And because he didn't vote to override the governor's veto, the Republican senator said, nah, you don't get approved. So y'all be careful what you do if you think you have a political future in Louisiana.
Amen. Amen.
Did you notice that they took it in one bite? Both. We already have open carry.
Right.
They in one piece of legislation they said you can carry without a state permission slip, and you can carry if you're 18. I'm not sure right now if 18-year-olds can get carry permits, so this might have been 2 steps toward freedom.
Very cool. I want to go back to our last story. We got a comment in here. Big John 410 says, I hope it covers FPC since I am a member. Well, I as well am a member, but we're going to have to find out. As time goes on, we'll find out. So, and even beyond that, if it does cover FPC members, they would have to cover not only the Fifth Circuit, they'd have to cover my Eighth Circuit. So let's go ahead and we want to. I got one more I absolutely want to cover here. Democrats advance gun control bills through Pennsylvania House. Authorities could temporarily seize firearms, and background checks would be expanded for gun buyers under 2 bills passed Monday in the Pennsylvania House, where Democrats are using their razor-thin majority to push gun control measures after a year-long standstill in the politically divided government. The party describes proposals as relatively moderate measures to cut down gun trafficking, suicide deaths, accidental shootings, and day-to-day violence. Republicans oppose the bill, saying they will punish law-abiding gun owners. While this is just the first step, passing these... Yeah, there we go. There they go, saying it out loud again. While this is just the first step, by passing these common sense and responsible gun safety measures, we've shown our neighbors and communities that we really don't care. No, that's not what they're saying, but anyway, this and you know, red flag law, we discuss it all the time, but these expanded background checks, what are they going to be getting by doing in the state what the federal government is already doing, other than slowing stuff down?
Okay, politically divided government, it's unlikely that this will make it through the Pennsylvania Senate. The Democrats will then say, we would have, your little boy who was murdered by a gangbanger that we let out on the street 10 times, but he would have been alive if those nasty Republicans had let us impose more gun control. Notice who the House Speaker is, a Philadelphia Democrat. Philadelphia has a Soros-funded prosecutor. He's throwing criminals back on the street, and crime is going through the roof. The Democrats are desperate for somebody to blame for their own failures that result in this crime. This bill is a smokescreen.
And let me. There was one story you might remind me. This is off Breitbart.com. This is not in show notes, Robin. I'm sorry,
That's okay. Not a problem.
but this is an AWR Hawkins story. At least 22 people were shot, 4 of them fatally, Friday into Sunday night in Democrat-run Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The
Exactly. I
weekend's
saw
first
that story.
fatal shooting occurred around 8 p.m. at a barbershop in the 2000 block of Kensington Avenue. The shooting victim, yada yada. But anyway, yeah, Philadelphia is actually more Chicago than Chicago.
Someone asked me today what we should do to help convince the ordinary citizens about the virtue of firearms ownership. My answer is show them every time gun control failed. Every violent holdup with a gun in Philadelphia is failed gun control. How's that gun control working for you? Looks like it failed again. Why are you blaming this violence on us? Yeah, go for it, guys.
Rob, there's one more story in show notes. You brought it up, but it's a great topic. Why don't you take this one, and then we'll talk about we'll comment here in a minute.
Which one? The black Suburban or the San
Yes,
Francisco?
that black Suburban.
Yeah, I love this. We titled it, I'd like an armed guard driving a black Chevy Suburban, please. Atlanta's Kerry Brown isn't an ordinary Uber driver. He doesn't drive for Uber. He's also a private investigator and an experienced bodyguard. Usually he works for celebrities and politicians. He wants his riders to feel what it's like to have, quote, executive protection, close quote. Who do we see mostly on the news getting robbed, getting raped? It's an average person. What I'm creating is unfortunately a necessary evil. It's become a necessity, Brown said. His new ride-sharing app called Black Wolf lets you request a driver who is armed. The app, which launched last week, has already had 79,000 downloads. Welcome to Atlanta, you all.
And Atlanta is not Chicago, and because of the politics in Georgia, is not likely to become Chicago in the near future. This is in the real world. This is a fantastic solution to that. What is a real problem? Both Lyft and Uber deny their drivers the ability to carry a firearm while they're driving. It will get you deactivated, fired basically, but it'll get you deactivated from both apps post haste. In the real world, in a perfect situation, the open market would take care of it, and this looks like that's starting to happen. There's a new app with drivers who are armed, and we'll see if it becomes more popular than Uber and Lyft. Now, I did read something about this story a little bit earlier. It's more expensive than Uber or Lyft as far as per ride because you're paying for the protection. I think it starts with $45 to pick up, where I think Uber and Lyft is less than $5, and then there's the per mile charge. But yeah, I'd love to see this.
I think that will vary depending on the number of drivers this man has. You're an Uber or Lyft driver in a city like Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia. Do you feel safe? You might be a gun owner, but you need to make money. All of a sudden you go, I know a way I can both feel safe at work as I drive and earn some money. Sounds like a plan.
It absolutely does. We are running real close to the end of our time here, Rob. On our way out the door, as I always do, I want to ask you to plug self-defense gun stories and anything else you want to plug, man.
So Paul and I are on the Polite Society podcast. We got 3, 4, 5 of us. We run 90 minutes because we try and cover the news. I host the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast with me and another firearms instructor. We whittle the news, typically for self-defense events, down to 20 minutes. My Slow Facts blog has been, I I now have over 2,100 articles there. My writing is picked up at Clash Daily and at Opslands. Thank you, Paul.
2,100 articles, man. When does the Slowfax novel come out? Because that's getting to be where you're at.
It's an encyclopedia now.
All right. On my part, this starts our broadcast week for the Bullet. We do have coming up this week. I closed my calendar. Let me reopen everything that's associated with that. Coming up tomorrow, we have Dan Waz, Matt Mallory scheduled Friday, and Tom Wall's Training Friday is coming up this week as well. This Friday, our topic is going to be, and we were scheduled to do this 2 weeks ago, but I had to take some time. Is working with firearms, is shooting a martial art? That is the discussion coming up for this Friday. So that does it for us today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.